now. If you've got any questions at all throughout the webinar, please feel free to pop them in the chat box. We'll either get to them during the presentation or afterwards. But other than that, I'll load the slides up and I'll pass over to Arnold.
Okay, thank you so much, Phoebe. Thanks for organizing this, and thanks to all of you for joining this session. Really appreciate it. So today I'll be telling you a little bit about teaching English in China. I'd like to make this session as conversational as possible. So at any time we have questions, just pop them into the box, and I'll look to answer them as much as possible in real time. So yeah, a little bit of information about the company. Basically, I was one of the co-founders of this company. I personally went to teach in China after university. I was just in a situation where I'd previously done Camp America. I'd spent some time working in Israel, and I'd really enjoyed those experiences. And I was basically looking for something really interesting to do before doing a master's degree. So I had some Chinese friends at university, and I heard a lot about China. So that was the reason why I settled on, going to teach English in China. So I'll get to the experience you need and the kind of what it's all about. But what I would say from the outset is that I went in without any formal teaching experience, and it's really the same for the vast majority of people who've done our program over the years. So what I will be talking about today is a little bit more about us as a company, what teaching in China is all about, daily life, the cultural differences, and then also, all the logistics in terms of pay, the costs involved, and the application process. So who we are. So we've been going for a good few years, since 2005. We've placed a lot of teachers in China, well over 1,000 at this point. So how the company started was basically that I was obviously back from China and had a fantastic experience. But I did feel that, doing something like this requires a lot of preparation, requires a lot of understanding of what it's all about, requires sourcing a really good school. So I did feel that, there was value in a company like this who basically helps you every step of the way, from finding a school to the visa process and all of that. So we work with a variety of schools. We've got summer placements, long-term placements. I think today we'll mostly be talking about the long-term placements, which are open to all of you who are in a final year, looking to do something for maybe 6 months or more likely a year after university. And within that, we've got lots of different options within private and state schools. We do also have a summer program as well. So, of course, just want to get straight to one of the elephants in the room, I guess, in terms of the current situation in the world, and that's COVID-19, of course. So the situation is that in China, because, it's sort of, obviously they dealt with it at an earlier stage, and it started there. So basically, things have now returned really to normal, which is, great to hear in the sense of our lives here as well. I think basically they're totally back to normal. There's very few cases. Schools are back now everywhere. So in terms of going to China, though, the key factor is that the border at this moment in time remains closed. So this started in March. And like everywhere, I think there's not 100% set in stone timeline or policy on what's next. So what we're doing now is talking to our school partners, our friends in China, and what seems most likely is that the borders will reopen in September or perhaps October this year. So if you're graduating around this time or a recent graduate and you're looking to go to China, our general approach is to talk to you now, potentially do an interview, already put you in touch with the school, get you started on the visa procedures that you can do now, which are quite a few, and then get everything in place to the extent that when the borders reopen, you maybe have another month or so to go and you can fly out very soon after that. So we're basically looking to recruit for roles starting in October or November. With the caveat, of course, that if the borders open a little bit later, it would be a little bit later that you'd go. but there's a lot we can do now to get you started and get everything secured. So we have at the moment, we've got a group of about 40 teachers every day in a WhatsApp group, so you can get to know everyone else who's going, because that's a very key thing that we strive to do, to help you kind of go through this experience with other people in the same boat. So at the moment, we've got these 40 people. They're on a WhatsApp group. They're all talking. Every Friday, I would send an update about all the latest news, visa procedures you can prepare for. So you kind of go through the process together. So in terms of qualifications, if you're looking to do a summer program, which is 2 weeks of teaching or 7 weeks of teaching, there are no formal requirements for that. Basically, you'll be teaching oral English to young students, and the main thing we're looking for with all our programs is just really a lot of enthusiasm, interest in working with younger children, and creativity. Because in China, often you would get to lead your own classes, so you get to devise games, organize competitions. A lot of it's also just about sharing cultural information. So there's no formal requirements for the summer program. In terms of the longer term program, there's basically 2 key elements that you need to get a work visa. So one is a completed degree. So you can apply now if you're waiting for graduation, or you don't have the certificate ready as of right now. That's not a problem. You can apply, but you will need to do the completed degree when you go out to China. Another element is a TEFL certificate. So it's teaching English as a foreign language. It's an online course that you do in your own time. So we work with partners, and we can of course refer you to the suitable partner, but also it's included in some of the programs that we offer. The course is included in part of the fee. So those are the 2 sort of pieces of paper you would need to get the work visa. But other than that, there's no teaching experience required, and there's also no need to speak any Mandarin. This might be surprising. I think the background there is that either you work with really young children and you conduct lessons in English, but you're supported by a local Chinese person who helps you basically at vital times in the class and sort of organizes it for you and translates a few things. In my personal experience, I worked with older students who are maybe 17, 18, 19 years old at a private language institute. So they were all really good at English, quite conversational. And my lessons with them, they were all about preparing them to go out. So to study abroad, in fact. So basically, with that age bracket, you wouldn't need a teaching assistant, and you can just rephrase or adjust the way you say things if needed. So a little bit more of what it involves. One of the things I would also say is that we are really interested in helping you have the very, very best experience. So we've got a whole range of potential placements that we can line up for you. So I work with the more older students. It also goes to your personal interest. For me, I did a political science degree and sociology, and I was really fascinated with going to China and kind of having conversations with local people and sort of really seeing what it was like living there. And that was one of the things I really loved about it. It's so authentic. As a teacher, you see everything. You hear about families, you hear about the education system, you hear about kind of their view of their own country, of other countries, and that's fantastic. If you have those kind of interests, it might make sense for you to, like me, maybe work with kind of high school students or older students. There's a whole range though, because Fabienne, she's one of our alumni who is now actually teaching in London at a primary school. So when she was teaching in Suzhou in China, she worked at a kindergarten, and she really enjoyed that. So there's the whole spectrum. It's literally kindergarten, primary schools, middle schools, high schools, and university. So as part of the application procedure, we would have a detailed interview for about half an hour over Skype or on the phone. And this is something we can talk about kind of the pros and cons. Later, I might, pop details for our YouTube channel into the chat box here. because yeah, there's a lot of videos there. There's the pros and cons of working with different age groups. So there's some differences between that. But in general, in terms of your role is very focused on oral English. If you work at a state school, for example, the students might have certain days where they're doing 40-minute lessons with a Chinese teacher that are focused on vocabulary, on grammar. When it's your day of the week to teach oral English, what's expected of you is that you get them to speak, as much as possible. So it's all about games. It's all about listening to your voice and group activities where they practice. So in terms of relevant work experience as well for this, I mean, it's so varied because it could really literally be anything. I think maybe you've worked at a summer camp before. Maybe you've had teaching experience in schools. That would be fantastic. But equally, it could be that you've worked as a student ambassador at the university, or you've done tutoring. Anything can be relevant to sort of fun and creative lessons. Yeah, so if you have any questions about this or sort of the work involved, do please pop in questions, and I'd love to answer them in real time. But for now, go to the next slide, which is more about daily life. Because yeah, as I mentioned, I think for myself, in my experience, being a teacher in China was so good because it is very immersive. You probably eat at local restaurants. I remember thinking about finding a local barbershop down the road, finding good places to maybe watch football games or things like that. And that's also something I would really stress here in this section, is that one of the things that stood out most in terms of my personal experiences in China and what I've seen from people on the program is that it's obviously completely different in terms of the culture and things you'll be doing, the places you'll be visiting and traveling to, and all of that is completely new and exciting culturally. But I would also say that in terms of, especially for longer term placements, in terms of settling and having a good experience, to a surprising extent, there's also some things that you're doing back home that you'll probably keep doing in China. So we have a community Facebook group for alumni that I would also like to invite you to, and I'll pop into the chat at the end. Because we've got maybe about 1,000 people on that group, people who've done the program, expressed an interest in the program. And things that come up there are things like, where can I find really good Mandarin lessons in the big cities? Or, if I want to, play football or rugby or something like in Beijing or in other big cities, how would I go about that? So that's one of the things that I think within our community and within the way we do things, and the people also hopefully you meet in person at our orientation day or perhaps through a session like this, you would really draw on the experiences of our alumni. In this picture, you see James. He helped me earlier this week on Tuesday for a webinar where we kind of invite some of our alumni and talk about their experiences. So that's also something you can sign up for, and he's probably someone you would hear from directly as well as part of this process. But in terms of sort of the local arrangements, in the vast majority of cases, you basically live at the school. I lived at the school. If not, it's probably walking distance from the school. So you don't have much of a commute usually. You tend to work 2 days. It's a regular schedule in the sense that you have 2 days off. And I'll get to some of the differences between state and private schools in a minute. But you'd have 2 days off. And of course, there's a lot of travel opportunities on these days off. We also make sure that you're placed with other people. Either that's, if you work at a private institute, you usually have about 10 colleagues. So those are people working at the same school that you probably have lunch with and kind of socialize with all the time. But then there's also a wider sort of Teach English in China network where we have the alumni group, and you meet people at orientation days and things who work in different cities you might stay in touch with. Okay, so I see a question. Yes, so this is on the website. I'll probably pop through the website link at the end. But yeah, our website is very comprehensive in terms of city guides, lots of blog posts by people who've done this before and their insights. So definitely pop that in. Also, we've got a YouTube channel, so I will pop that in there as well. But basically, for China, there's so much choice. You would get to decide: do I want to work in one of the big cities? Do I want to work with young children? Do I want to work with adults? So it's all things that we would tailor exactly to your needs. But yeah, then in terms of the last point, I think the key to sort of a happy experience and making the absolute most of it is really to keep doing the things you love doing. It could be that you want to volunteer. Nicola, she's one of our teachers who did this program and ended up staying for 4 years. And I think one of the reasons she had such a great time was that in the first year, she did a psychology degree and she just decided to go volunteer at a local hospital and just help out. And I think that was one of the things that really integrated her into the community. So we will help you with things like that. Okay, so as I mentioned, there are some differences for this is within the long-term option. So if you can commit to roughly a year in China, you can choose between working at a state school and a private language institute. So there's a few differences. Basically, the state schools are similar to state school teaching here. It happens Monday to Friday. In China, classes tend to be relatively large with 40 to 50 students. This is an option that is, I think, best suited if you're looking to enjoy the teaching and do a great job with that, but also want to travel quite extensively. Because there's 2 semesters, and between those semesters in January and February around Chinese New Year, you have a 4 to 6 week holiday. So it's the ideal time to do extensive traveling, and most of our teachers end up traveling widely in Southeast Asia. So that's something to consider. The alternative is working at a private language institute. So private language institutes, they're basically schools that provide additional commercial English lessons around the school schedule. So if your workload, that would mean that you're likely to work Wednesday, Thursday, Friday between sort of 2 p.m. and 8 p.m. And then Saturday, Sunday, more 9 to 5. And your days off would be on Monday and Tuesday. So in those situations, you work with 10 students usually in a class. You have a little bit less holiday, still probably 5 weeks, but slightly higher salary on average. So yeah, this is an interesting discussion that I'd love to have with you if you're interested in applying. I worked at the private school. I think what's good about that is definitely the fact that you get probably closer personal relationships with the students because you see them every day. It's only 10 of them, so you get to know everyone's name and sort of learn all about them. It's a little bit less like that when you work at a state school, but perhaps you get, even more authentic cross-section of the whole Chinese population and the school system in China at a state school. So this is definitely one. If you have any questions, feel free to pop them in because I think this is such an open question. I think my approach with this company from the beginning has been to share what this kind of experience is and all the amazing benefits that it has and all the travel opportunities and the growth and the career possibilities, but also to talk honestly about some of the challenges that it does involve, obviously. And there's a few, and I think they're different for everybody. There's a few listed here on the screen. Of course, the language barrier, cultural differences, not having teaching experience, homesickness. I think that these might affect everyone differently. But to mention briefly a few things about this language barrier, I think in terms of the teaching itself, there's no expectation at all for you to speak Mandarin. But of course, in wider daily life and in society, it does help if you're picking up some Mandarin. To my shame, I must say I didn't learn as much Mandarin when I was in China. This is also partly related to the state and private school aspect. If you work at a private school, you've got 10 foreign teachers all the time with you. You maybe end up spending some more time naturally in kind of expat bars, restaurants, and that's great. And I had a really good time, obviously, with the experience. But if you're looking to learn Mandarin, it might be better to work at a state school. I guess my point here is also that it's helpful to learn Mandarin, but even if you don't learn it, you'll still have a very good experience. In terms of the cultural differences, there are so many. I think China is a fascinating country. As you live there, you get to make lots of local friends. You get to talk to them about all sorts of things, and you'll find that there are a lot of cultural differences. But I think the key thing is that people in China, when they see a foreign person in their country, they see you as a friend and they see you as someone they really want to help because I think they have an intuitive understanding of what you're facing in terms of the cultural differences and the barriers. So this is definitely something you would sort of work through with the help of the people you meet. In terms of not having teaching experience, I think the key thing with this is absolutely that you walk into the classroom and you enjoy it. You know, I've seen people go in with no experience at all and thrive and have an amazing experience. So I think the key thing is to go in and find why you would enjoy teaching students. Is it that you want to learn about China's culture or society, or do you want to become a teacher and is this the place you want to practice? Anything it is, whatever it is, as long as you go into the classroom with a smile and an enjoyment to it, you're going to do a great job. Because basically, as a native speaker or as a native level speaker, you have so much knowledge to share with the students, and they really appreciate it. In terms of homesickness, I think we do everything we can to build a really good community. So you have kind of a lot of resources and a lot of support there with you, because the people you're doing this program with, they would be in the same boat. I think Christmas is an interesting example because it can be a little bit of a tricky one, of course, sometimes like this. But I've heard that, you know, maybe people get together with all their foreign friends for Christmas and, you know, divide cooking dishes and things like that, and end up having an incredibly memorable Christmas, albeit a different one. And you do have at least one day off for Christmas for that. A little bit of information on the pay and how that works. There are some differences in terms of state schools, private schools. The cities, generally, the pay is higher in the bigger cities, but also the cost of living is more expensive. So in general, the key point is that, you know, you earn a good wage that is, you know, goes a really long way due to the much lower cost of living. So in general, you probably save half your salary every month. So regularly, and including this week, I regularly get questions from people who are saying, like, you know, I saved, potentially a few £1,000s over the course of the year or even more. How do I get it home? Things like that. So it's definitely a really good setup in that way. And, you know, you live a comfortable lifestyle in terms of eating out quite a lot, which is relatively really cheap in China. Also relatively, compared to here, trains are really cheap. For example, you know, going all the way from one end to China let's say from Shanghai to Guangzhou all the way in the south, it's probably about £30. So for such a long distance, that's a lot cheaper than it would be here. So this is, again, in terms of the salary and your considerations, we will work with you to find what you want. The housing is provided free in most cities. In some cities, there is an arrangement where you arrive and the school arranges accommodation for the first week and then set you up with accommodation after that. Costs. So this is, again, when you apply with us, we would want to really be very transparent and clear about what you face in terms of costs, because there are some. I think the key consideration here is that, you know, based on our experience, it's so important to have a legal work visa, do everything by the book in terms of being in China, so that when you're out there, everything is sorted, everything is done properly. But obtaining that work visa does cost some money. There's an outline here of some of the costs. So it's 151 for the visa itself. There's a process called legalizing documents, which involves basically getting an approval from the British to Chinese government, as well as a lawyer, to say that your degree, your TEFL certificate, and your criminal background check are all proper documents. So that costs £305, but you get that reimbursed in full. Then there's a few other costs, like the flight to China, which are reimbursed. And then the choices in terms of the state school program. Our state school program includes more training. It includes a TEFL course. It includes more support, and there's a fee for that of £549. If you prefer a free program, there's a private school program. £150 does apply as a holding deposit, but you get that back when you're in China, so it ends up being a free program. So if you have more questions about this, and in general as well, I would really encourage you, if you're interested, to set up a private chat with me anytime later today for 10 minutes to go over this, and we could certainly cover this in more detail on that call. Career development. So this is a very exciting one, because I think in China there are so many opportunities you get, and I do realize that this slide could have done with slightly better cropping there. Apologies for that. But what really stands out to me is that in terms of the context I've had with our recent alumni, is that it's so diverse. You know, the reasons why people did this program are varied, but also what people end up doing with it are so exciting, because We've had people do this and pursue a teaching career through all the experience, because you probably get experiences about how you handle classroom situations, how you might deal with cultural difference as a teacher. And, being able to say that you've been to China as a teacher is a fantastic, reference point for all of that. But it could be that you go to China, you learn Mandarin, and you end up doing something else in China. There's one guy, he started learning Mandarin from the start. He had a law degree, and 5 years later, he's an intellectual property lawyer in Beijing. We've had people who are working in marketing in China. We've got people working in sales in China. We also have people who have come back to the UK or their respective countries and are working in the government fast stream or things like that. So there's so much you can do with this. And as a relatively small company, I'm really passionate to sort of help you with this. If you have a specific interest, to put you in touch with the relevant people and the relevant alumni of our program. And we also have a specific guide for this with all their contacts. Okay, so I realized, especially nowadays, there's quite a few companies that offer placements like this. So I just want to run through a few of the things why you might want to consider going with us. We've got a good number of years of experience, a lot of people who've done the program before, which means that we have really acquired a great network of schools and partners that we work with. And, that includes also the Chinese government. For our state school program, we're actually partnering with the Chinese government. So that's quite a prestigious thing that took us a while to get going, but we're really proud of that. Equally, we're really transparent. We're on Trustpilot, and all our vlogs and blogs and all our information is authentic, and it includes all aspects of the experience that you might face in China. Okay, so if you're interested, I'll pop some details into the chat window in a moment, in terms of website, in terms of my email address, and ways to contact me to follow up. But the general process is that if you're interested, you put together a CV and cover letter to express your interest. In that, I'd just like to know about what got you excited about this. Like, what kind of background do you have in terms of working with people, being creative, being a leader, and getting involved with this? And again, it could really be anything that could be relevant. So after that, we set up a 30-minute call. This could be by phone. It could also be by Skype. And in it, you talk to myself about all aspects that we've kind of talked about in a condensed way today, but then with your CV in front of me and sort of having a more personal conversation. And then soon after that, if you're been successful, you'd receive an offer. This would probably happen within a number of days. Yes, so we're on all social media, so I will pop all these in the chat box in a minute, but definitely check them out. I'd say that potentially the best way of finding out if this is for you would be spending some time on the YouTube channel, watching some videos, watching some day in the life kind of accounts of people who've been doing this, and sort of just see how you feel about it, if it's something that you could see yourself doing and are excited about. That's the end of the slide. So if you have any questions, please type them in the description and let me know.
Brilliant, thank you, Arnold. That was very interesting. It's almost making me rethink my plans for after university as well. But yeah, guys, if anyone's got any questions, feel free to pop them in the chat box. And as I mentioned, and I've just put a chat in as well, feel free to book in for the one-to-one chats with Arnold this afternoon. I think the cut-off's 2 p.m. to book them, but the appointments are up until 5 p.m. today. So you've got a fair bit of opportunity this afternoon to be able to have a one-to-one chat and ask any more questions that you might have. Oh, I think we've just had a question come through.
Yes, okay. Yes, definitely. It's very likely in terms of the accommodation and how that works. So if you work at a state school, usually you have your own apartment, at the school or very near the school, and then if they employ maybe 4 or 5 foreign teachers, likely is that you're literally living next to your colleagues. That was the same for me. At a private school, it's really similar. The private schools that we work with usually have a policy where they have really good and high standard accommodation where you live alone or with one other person, foreign person from the program, in that accommodation. So that's kind of the default option. So when you arrive, they house you there. However, if you decide, I'd feel more comfortable, I prefer to live, maybe in the city center or somewhere else, they can also say that you get an additional housing allowance to cover that flat, basically. So there's a choice there. But yeah, certainly it's likely that as a default option, you'd be living either with someone from the program and always have your own bedroom, or maybe a shared kitchen, or have your own apartment altogether, but next to someone in the same boat. Thank you so much. We're really happy to hear that. So the YouTube channel is here as well. We're on Instagram, and there's daily information on there.
Fantastic. Well,
final word to say. If you are interested in China, but potentially also in other destinations, since last year we've been working hard to look at expanding and using the same kind of passion for travel, education, and organizing really safe placements to some other countries. That's recently come to fruition, and we've got a sister company called Impact Teaching that organizes some placements in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Poland. So it's basically based on the exact same standards and goals as Teach English in China. So just in case you're interested in other countries, I would also share that. So, okay, that's from Shanine. So the question about the graduation. The key point with this is that some of our partners, the government program, basically the state school program, is able to process a invitation for your work visa based on a final year statement from the university. So that's okay. But in terms of being in China and arriving in China and the final process of converting the work visa, you will need the official degree certificate. So it's a question to see if you will be able to get that from the university earlier, potentially, if it's December. If not, we've got intakes in February as well. So it might be that February would be a suitable alternative. But yeah, certainly if you can obtain a hard copy of the certificate before you fly out to China, you'll be able to go later this year.
fantastic. Well, if there aren't any more questions, I'm sure Arnold, you're very busy, so we won't keep you much longer. But yeah, as we said, if everyone can just make sure they've put their attendance in on the link that I've just popped in the chat box. And other than that, feel free to have a look through Teach English in China's social medias that Arnold's just put in the chat box as well, and book in for any one-to-ones that you might like for this afternoon. But other than that, just thank you everyone for coming along, and thank you, Arnold, for a brilliant presentation.
Okay, thank you all so much for attending. I really appreciate it. Thank you for organizing, Phoebe.
No problem. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.